So we're talking about Meilah. So real quick background on Meilah. So Meilah is a halacha. It's an isser during the times of the Beis Hamikdash. If you were to be makdish something, so it could be that you're bringing a korban, so it could be an animal. But it also could be a donation that you're making to the Beis Hamikdash. So it could be money or some other item of value that you say, you know what, this is hektish, meaning that it's now meant for the Beis Hamikdash. Once you do that, if you use that item, whatever it is that object is, if you use it for any kind of non-holy endeavor, if you now take that animal and you decide to use it to plow your field, or you shecht it for Shabbos dinner, that is an isser of Meilah. Basically taking, trespassing on hektish and using it for something that's chol. So that's where the Rambam is going to be talking about, is Hilchos Meilah. So that is a section, that he's codified. But we're going to, like I said, we're going to start in Parshas Yisro. So this is, we're picking up right before the Aseret Adibros. And Hashem says, Vayomer Hashem Moshe lech el ha'am v'kidashtam hayom u'machar v'chibasusam simlosam. So this is where Kodesh Baruch Hu tells Moshe, you need to go down to Bnei Yisrael and you need to get them prepared. Right? It's time to get ready for Matan Torah. So they have to cleanse themselves and spiritually, and they have to wash their clothes, is what it looks like. And you're going to do this for a 3-day period. Because on the third day, that's going to be Matan Torah. Okay. Then more. Now, not only that, but you also have to sort of set up this sort of fence or boundary around the mountain, around Har Sinai, saying to Bnei Israel, Hishamru lachem alos bahar unago bekatsehu, that they cannot go up the mountain and they can't even touch it. They can't even come in contact even at the bottom of the mountain. They really have to sort of be careful where they go. Why? Kohanogea bahar mosumas. Anybody who comes in contact with Har Sinai during the times of Matan Torah is going to die. Lo sigabo yad kisako yisakeo o yaro yira im behema imish lo yichya. So it's interesting. So it says not only people, im behema imish, your animals as well cannot. They will also die. They'll also be put to death. Until the shofar is blown afterwards to sort of signify, that Matan Torah is sort of over, and now Har Sinai is back to being its normal, sort of just a plain mountain and no longer a place of holiness. So what's sort of interesting is the fact that the pasuk has to call out behemoths too. So it seems like, and we know that they were camped there for at least a few days before Matan Torah at Har Sinai, before Maimed Har Sinai. So I guess the implication is most likely that before all of this was happening, people might have been grazing their mountain, grazing their behemoths right up the mountain. That's a likely idea. Okay. So Vayerd Moshe min ha'ar el ha'am. So Moshe does what he's told, right? He comes down to Bnei Israel. And they start to do their preparations. Vayomer el ha'am, he says to them, you have to separate from your wives as well for this 3-day period. Because on this third day, there's going to be these, the sounds, the lightning, and there'll be smoke, and the shofar will be very loud, and everybody was fearful of, this is clearly, it sort of paints the scene of something that seems certainly surreal and scary. And they're getting ready. So I'm just going to, because there's another point that's as we get down here. So now Hashem is coming down to the mountain in fire, and it smoking, like the smoke is billowing as if it were like a furnace. Vayechared kol ha'or me'od, and the mountain was quaking. Vayikol shofar holich v'chazik me'od, and the sound of the shofar was increasing, not decreasing, but increasing as it went, as the time went on. Moshe yidaber v'Elokim yanin v'kol. So we have Moshe speaking with Hashem, giving the utterances. Vayirid Hashem al Har Sinai al Rosh Hahar, Vayikra Hashem the Moshe al Rosh Hahar Vayam Moshe. So now Hashem is at the top of the mountain. Moshe goes back up to the top. Vayomer Hashem al Moshe Reid Ha'ed Ba'am. And Hashem says right away, no, Moshe, go back down. Pen Yehersu el Hashem Neros v'nafal mimenu rav. Because lest some of the people of Bnei Israel want to see HaKadosh Baruch Hu, meaning that they'll go up the mountain, and then and they'll fall, meaning that they will die. V'gama kohanim hanigashim el Hashem yiskadashu. And even the priests, even the kohanim that were mekadosh themselves, penifratz b'hem Hashem, they also cannot go. So even Aharon is not able to go up the mountain. Vayomer Moshe al Hashem lo yuchal alna loso Har Sinai. So Moshe says to Hashem, "Wait, you're telling me to go back down to tell them to warn them again? But we've already warned them. I told them what you told me, that they cannot go up the mountain. You told us that you have to separate, sort of put up this boundary around the mountain, and sanctify yourselves." Vayomer elav Hashem lechreid ve'alisa, and Hashem repeats himself. He says, "No, go down." Ve'alisa davar onimach va'konim v'am al yeharsu. So apparently, Aharon and the Kohanim, because it says ve'alisa tav yaharonim mach va'konim v'am al yeharsu. Aharon is apparently able to go at least somewhat up the mountain, but the Kohanim were not, and the nation. Al yeharsu la'alos al Hashem. Why? Pen yifratz bam. Again, there will be, serious consequences. There'll be this big problem if they go up the mountain. Okay. Another interesting thing, though, is that when Hashem the second time warns, tells Moshe to warn them yet again, this time it doesn't say the behemoths. It only says the nation. So it seems clear at this point that the Bnei Yisrael understand that Har Sinai has changed its status, right? This is Maimin Har Sinai. This isn't the time to be grazing your sheep. But what seems to be the indication from the Psukim is that perhaps from the inspiration of Maimin Har Sinai, you'll get those who get so inspired that they may want to do something, and sort of assume that they have a higher status than they really do, a higher madrega than they really do, and they may go up the mountain mistakenly. And that will be, a horrible thing, because that will cause them to die. Okay, so that is, like I say, that's the introduction. That's like the psukim right before the Aseres Adibros. So let's jump into the Mishnah Torah and Hilchos Meilah. So this is all the way at the end of Hilchos Meilah, the last parak, and I believe it's the last halacha in the last parak. So the Rambam starts by saying, "Roy la'adam lehisbonin b'mishpatei haTorah hakdosha, v'leida sof inyanam k'fi kocho." It's really sort of incumbent upon all of us to really sort of seek out and understand all of the laws of the Torah, of our holy Torah, and understand the depths, the end of each of these inyanim, of each subject, as far as your own abilities. Everybody's individual abilities are different. So, we're not expected to be able to do it like a Talmid Chacham could, or and a child obviously can't do it like an adult. But according to our abilities, we all have this this sort of obligation, that it's worthy of our time to be doing this. Now, what happens though? You're doing this, so you're going through the Torah, and you don't understand something, right? It's just not clear. Like what's going on? What does this really mean? V'lo yada lo ilo. You don't understand what the explanation is, or what's going on. So he's going to tell us three things that sort of govern how we approach the situation where we're learning something and we don't understand, right? We've all been there, right? We hear something, we learn something, and we just don't, it doesn't make sense. So the first thing is, Ayahi Kal Ba'inav. The first thing is you can't just sort of write it off, right? That's sometimes how we think is, okay, I don't understand it. Yeah, it's probably not that important anyway. No big deal. I'll move on. No, we can't do that. We cannot just sort of write it off and say it's not important or it's a simple matter. And number two, and here's where he's quoting the psukim we just saw, "V'lo yaharos la'alos al Hashem pen yifrotz bo," and he uses this and says, he uses that pasuk to say, you also can't just sort of run up the mountain because, and what he seems to be indicating, and we'll see this because he's going to quote it again, is somewhat of a notion of, again, sort of overstepping your capacity, not really understanding through inspiration, you might lose sense of what your capacity is. So you got to be careful of that. And number three, v'lo tehei machshavto bo k'machshavto kishar divrei achol. Sometimes we are inclined to say, I have a lot of understanding of the world around me, right? Secular knowledge or just wisdom of having, lived life. Sometimes we want to sort of apply those thoughts or those ideas to what we learn. I think a good example of this is, the famous story of Elisha, where you've got the Isha Hashumanis, who he helps, and then she has a child, and then the child dies. She comes running after Elisha, and literally days later, he goes up to the attic where the boy, or this dead boy, is lying, and he resuscitates him. And you might think, oh well, maybe it was CPR or something, right? That would be applying our divrei chor, our understanding of medicine. We might say, well, he was just applying CPR. That's really all it was. And this is where I think what the Rambam is saying is, no, we have to say that it's not just that. There's something, there's something much more deep going on here than to say that Elisha simply knew CPR. Maybe a silly example, but I think it, it just sort of, that's, I think, the point. So the Rambam says, Bo'ere kama hechmira Torah b'Meilah. So where's the Rambam going with this in terms of how we have to be careful when we run into a piece of Torah that we don't understand? So he says you have to really understand just how chomer, how chomer the Torah talks about with the idea, the Indian of Meilah. So he says, Uma'im eitzim va'avanim va'afer va'efer. Think about all these physical objects, wood, stones, anything else. Kevin shenikra shem adon ha'olam alehem bidvarim bilvad. If all I say about them is I am dedicating these to the Beis HaMikdash, with my words I utter this, niskadshu, they're now holy. And now if I take that same piece of wood and I do something, I throw it in the fireplace or something like that, I now, even if I do it accidentally, I got it mixed up with my other firewood. So I'm even doing a b'shogeg, there's still kapara that has to be done. Right? I've still committed an avera this way. So it's called the chomer lemitzvos shechakak lanu hakadosh baruch hu shelo yivata adam bahem. This is even more so. How much more so, right? When we think about mitzvahs, that Hashem literally engraved them upon us and engraved them upon the tablets, that we cannot sort of kick at them and treat them improperly. Simply because we don't understand the reason behind them. So that's sort of going back to what he said up above, right? Now he's sort of taking that to a step further and saying, don't kick at them either. I don't like really shove them away. Number two, so this is so number two was up above. We said that don't overstep your abilities or your capacities or where you are, where you're holding. So this is and don't ascribe, don't sort of make up what those words mean or what that Torah means sort of off the top of your head. Sometimes I think sometimes we see that or sometimes we're even victim of doing that when we don't really understand something, but we sort of try to figure out, using our imagination, what maybe it's possibly means. And we ascribe something that has nothing to do with that actual Torah. And number three, just like we said before, you can't always apply divrei chol to Torah. Okay. So then he takes it further. It says, "Harei ne'amar b'Torah u'shmartem es kol chukosai ve'es kol mishpatai v'asisem osam." And you have to keep, right, all of my chukos, all the chukim, and the mishpatim. Amru chachamim litin shmira v'asiyah lechukim kamishpatim. What does that mean? That there's both shmira and asiyah. That you have to guard them, you have to keep them, but you also have to do them. V'asiyah yedua v'hisha yasa chukim. And this is talking about the chukim, the things we don't necessarily understand. V'shmir she'yizaher b'hen v'lo yidamer she'hen b'chusim min mishpatim. But he says, you have to be careful. Don't think that the chukim are less important than the mishpatim. והמשפטים הם המצווה שטעמם גלוי וטוב עשייתם בעולם הזה. ידוע, כגון איסור גזל שפיכת דמים. We understand, mishpatim we understand very well. And we understand why they are there. We understand that gezel is a problem. It's a problem for our community. It's a problem for the world. You can't do gezel. Shvichas damim, we understand, committing murder. Kibud avayim, we understand why it's important to honor your parents. Those are all things that are sort of sichli, right? They make sense to us. And it's easy for us to do them. But what about the ones we don't understand? So you can't start to think about why they are and what's going on with them. Think about, he says, think about like the fact that we don't eat pig, or basar v'chalav, egla rufa, paraduma, the Sa'ir HaMishtaleach on Yom Kippur. So think about it. Chazar is a good example, right? I remember once at work, I had a non-Jewish colleague who told me, yeah, I understand why you don't eat pig. It's because of trichinosis. But there's no trichinosis anymore, so you can go ahead and start eating chazar again. No, it's not, that may have been a toelis, right? That may have been advantageous to us once upon a time, but that wasn't the main reason why we don't eat pig. And we have to realize that we don't understand. We can't start thinking about it and sort of rationalizing it. And we also have to realize that the world around us is going to laugh at us for taking on these chukim. The Kamahaya David, and even David HaMelech, mitzvah mina minin, umina akum, shahayu meshivim al-chukim. The psukim in Tehillim clearly sort of indicate how David HaMelech himself, the nations around him, when he was fleeing from Shaul, were giving him a hard time about keeping the mitzvahs. I just want to move through this quickly, but he quotes a couple of psukim in Tehillim where it talks about how David HaMelech is sort of struggling with the fact that he's on the run from Shaul HaMelech, and he's getting all this, and sort of the world around him is giving him a hard time and making his life difficult for keeping all of the mitzvahs. But he says, "Kol mitzvosecha emuna sheker edafuni azareni," that all of your mitzvahs and the fact that HaKadosh Baruch Hu is always there, even when the lies are, chasing after me, but that always helps me. Right? That David HaMelech was always turning to HaKadosh Baruch Hu. And he says, "V'kol korbanos," just to sort of finish off, "V'kol korbanos kulan miklal hachukim hem." Keep in mind, all the korbanos are chukim. We don't understand how korbanos work. But Amru Chachamim shebishvil avodos hakorbanos olam omed. Like we see Chazal say this over and over again, that the Goyim would have never destroyed the Beis HaMikdash had they realized the damage that they did to the world as a whole because korbanos were not being brought. So we don't understand just how powerful some of these things are because we don't understand the reasoning behind them. Okay, so that's our Rambam in Hilchos Meilah. So again, what he's sort of warning us about is, on the one hand, we have a strong chiyuv to learn Torah, but we also have to realize that we're going to sort of hit the end of our capacity to understand things. It's going to happen once in a while, and we have to be careful about what we do and how we approach that situation, when it arises. And with that, I'm going to jump over to it again. Hopefully, I can read this okay, you as well. So we're going to pick this up. This is the shoot of the Oneg Yom Tov. So it's in this Agdama, and it starts with Os Ches. It's long, but he actually quotes the entire Rambam in its entirety. So that it's actually not as long as it appears. Okay, and he says, Ube emes, Chalila lemor Ashol Bechir Hashem, Shemo davar b'mezid. It's impossible to say. We can't say that Shaul HaMelech was doing Meilah, certainly not purposely. Of Rechuki Torah. Aval nira shemagi mevur bepasuk kanal. So the pasuk says, "Vayamas Shaul b'ma'alo asher ma'al b'Hashem." But the pasuk says when Shaul died, that he died with his Meilah. I mean, that's the word that he uses, asher ma'al b'Hashem, that he was Moel by Hashem. So what does that mean? So asher lo shebo v'gam leses be'ov lidrosh. So v'gam amar lo shomer v'gam lisha be'ov lidrosh. So one of the things that we have to understand is, and so maybe a quick background here. Towards the end of his life, Shaul HaMelech goes to this Balas Ov, right? A soothsayer, a fortune teller. I'm not sure what the right word is, to help him understand with the Milchama, I believe it was with the Plishtim, to understand like what he's supposed to do. So he goes to this woman. That's this Balas Ov. Okay. V'yesh lahavin b'masha amar b'ma'alo Asher Ma'al B'Hashem, Amar Asher Ma'al B'Hashem. So what exactly was the Meilah? V'chi ma inyan zeh melashon Meilah. Ulam yuvan hadvarim al pi lashon hazahav shal Rambam. He says, how do we understand this? You know what? If we look at the Rambam, the lashon hazahav, right, the golden words of the Rambam, Zal, and he says, and he quotes it here, v'zel lashono. So let me just jump down, because this is exactly, he's quoting all of what we just saw. So we don't need to go back over that. All right. Okay, perfect. So we're down here. So hidenu roim ki demaha Rambam zal hamechashi b'mitzvos b'sichlo umechape aleihim dvarim asher lokein. So he's going after one thing that the Rambam says, right? The Rambam says, what happens when you don't understand something and then you attribute to them, or you ascribe something to those words which isn't true? So he calls it lamel b'kadshe shemayim. He calls it Meilah on kadshe shemayim. Uba'alav b'kal v'chomer. And he builds this kal v'chomer that we saw. Medin Meilah me'etzim v'avonim k'mavur b'dvarav. Right? He said this kal v'chomer. If you can say that wood is, and stones are hektish, how much more so is Torah, words of Torah. Viniki chen anu omrim shechalil lachshov al Shaul b'chir Hashem shnei amar alav ben shana Shaul. So how do we attribute Meilah to him? It says, Chazal tell us that in the first year of his reign, he was like a 1-year-old in terms of chet. He was a tzaddik. So what's going on? So Shivata chas v'sholem mitzvah sebiadayim rak sheb'shnei hadvarim ha'ela chishev machshavos levato me'alav mitzvahs shelo yischayev ba. We do know that there are two problems with what Shaul did during his reign. He says, "V'hu kamosha amar demaise agag," right? That we have the whole thing when Shmuel Hanavi tells him you have to go and go after Amalek and you have to wipe them out. You have to destroy them all. But he allows Agag, the king, to live. Paraka me'alav ol hamalucha. Meilah mizvata mitzvahs mechias Amalek. So he was mevata by doing this, he was mevata a mitzvahs asay of mechias Amalek. K'moshe amar ki yeresi es Hashem veshma b'kolam. Ubi inyan. Okay, so that's one. But again, we're not seeing Meilah there. Ubi inyan b'melech b'balas ha'ov. But what about by balas ha'ov? Again, this woman who's like this fortune teller. K'siv vayomer Shmuel al Shaul El Shaul lameher gzatani la'alos osi. Shmuel Navi. So the scene is Shmuel Navi had already died. Shaul HaMelech is now at the end of his reign. The Ruach HaKodesh that he had as a Melech is now transferring over to David HaMelech. So Shaul no longer has that special connection to HaKadosh Baruch Hu. He no longer has Shmuel HaNavi either. And he is not able to get any kind of direction from the Kohanim, from a Navi, from anybody, what he's supposed to do about the Plishtim. Now, in reality, it's because it's no longer his job. He just doesn't realize that. That job is already transferring over to David HaMelech, what to do about the Plishtim. So what does he do? He goes over to this fortune teller to sort of help raise Shmuel Navi from the dead. That's the story. It's unclear from the Psukim. It's unclear whether she was able to do it or whether it's just that Shmuel Navi somehow, he gets Ruach HaKodesh back and he can talk to Shmuel Navi. It's not clear how that works exactly, but we do know that he went to this Baalas Ov. Okay, so when Shmuel Navi appears, he says, "Shaul, what are you doing? Why are you trying to bring back the dead?" Right? Vayomer Shaul, and Shaul says, "Tzar li ma'od v'plishtim nilchemu bi." I didn't know what to do. I didn't know what to turn. The Plishtim are fighting with me. Elokim sar malai, and HaKadosh Baruch Hu has sort of distanced himself from me. V'lo aneni od, gam biyad nevim, gam bechalomos, v'rakol lecha lo di'eni ma e'aseh, al kim v'nira she kavanaso haya, kevin dichsiv. Sorry, it is hard to read this. So in the interest of time, sorry, I apologize. Rather than going through it and me struggling through the words, I'll just tell you outside what the Una Yontav does, but he applies what the Rambam said. And what he understands is that Shaul HaMelech understood that to go after Ov, and these sort of these ideas of machshefa, of witchcraft or whatever it was, is completely usher. Shaul, again, this is how he understands it. This is his mahalech, is that he said Shaul felt that was only the case when you already have a Navi, or you have the Urim V'Tumim, or you have Ruach HaKodesh and HaKadosh Baruch Hu in a dream is coming to you and telling you, giving you direction, like what happens with a true Melech of Bnei Yisrael. Shaul believed that since he had none of those anymore, but he was still the king, he had permission, like he rationalized it, he had permission to go after some other thing like a fortune teller. That apparently in those days was, these people believed that there was some abilities there, not just, I guess, what we have today. And what the Ona Yontav is saying is that in that way, if we understand how the Rambam was describing to us, that you cannot ascribe words to Torah that you don't understand. Shaul Melech didn't understand that, no, even in that situation, and we understand why, even in that situation, you can't go after Ov. We understand why, because we see the whole story that David HaMelech was starting to come up. His reign was coming up and Shaul was going down. But Shaul didn't understand that, and he was ascribing, or he was paskening for himself based on his understanding that was incorrect. And because of that, he was over, at least to some degree, on Meilah, and that's where the pasuk is saying, Asher ma'al b'Hashem. So an application of the Rambam, and probably a good example of how we can sometimes get ourselves in trouble, even when we are trying to do things l'shem shemayim. So with that, we'll end here. But and again, apologies again for not being able to go through the text word by word. That was tough to read.